Hello, today we're going to make a bookmark, or a few bookmarks, just using scraps and a bit of stamping and a bit of foil. You can do whatever size you want, and it's just a nice little project that you can do to use up your scraps, but also they make quite nice gifts. So you could pop one in with a birthday card, get well card, whatever, and they wouldn't take up too much room. So the base is basically a piece of card. This is an old Easter egg box that I cut the sides off and the flat bits and kept. I've just measured and marked a thin strip and cut it off. On the back, I'm just going to sand it because it's quite smooth and it doesn't take the glue as well as the inside of what was the box. So I'm just going to sand a little bit of the shininess off, and then the glue will stick better. You can use decoupage glue, you can use watered down PVA, matte medium, thin gel medium, whatever you've got about, doesn't matter at all. I usually use a glue brush, but this is handy, so I'll use this. I'm also using watered down PVA. I've got lots of scraps of paper from my scrap box. There's quite a lot of book pages, which I'm very fond of using. If I find any with little numbers on, I keep the numbers separately because I like those. Also, I do quite a lot of dictionary pages because these are what I've come across in charity shops, and they tend to be the ones that nobody wants and are unloved and probably going in the rubbish eventually because they're unloved and uncared for and tend to fall apart through a lot of use in the past. You'll notice I'm getting all different colours, sizes of font, and just mixing it all up. I've also got some strips of music paper, which are rather nice. I'll just get a selection out. It's just tea stained lined paper. There's some tea stained grid paper. I'm not being precise about how I tear it, I just tear it any old how. I'll just put that out of the way for the moment. Get our scraps to the side. I'll do this side first. And you don't have to be very precise with your application. You're just going to sort of piece together the papers so that they cover your piece of cardboard. I like to put a first coat on the card, because then if does any is going to soak in, it starts to soak in to set off with, starts to dry, and then your subsequent coats dry quite easily. Right. So I'm just going to start here. I've got an old credit card or debit card or whatever, room key from Holiday Inns or whatever when they've stopped working, and I'm just smoothing out all the air bubbles. If you do get air bubbles, it's not a disaster. You can always just think it adds texture. So I'm just going to, where they overlap, I put a bit extra glue. Again, smooth it out. You'll notice that I'm not bothering to line up at the sides because that will get cut off later. This is a laminated sheet of paper so that it is fairly non-stick. As I say, I overlap. If I've got a nice edge like this, which is lovely, I do tend to line it up with the corner so I don't lose the nice colouring. It does slip sometimes. That's because the PVA isn't as good as decoupage glue on that medium, but it's nice and cheap if you're just making a cheap project. You've got little bits that aren't glued down. Just go back over them. That's quite nice because this paper's thin so you can see the text through. See, I think I'll go. And then once you've got one side covered, then you can add more interesting details. So this is nearly covered from top to bottom. So I'm going to add more interesting bits, just a few little bits on the top. Just make sure it's stuck. Alright, so that's more or less covered, but it's quite bland and boring. So I will add a few extra little bits that I'll find the edge. It'll give more interest. So that is a corner. So I'm going to glue some music paper onto the corner. I can feel where the edge is so that I know more or less on the edge. And that's made that a little bit more interesting. Let's see, this is a bit boring here, so we'll add a bit more there. This is part of one of the bits that I just cut off, so we'll go in there. Let's see, what else shall we have? I quite like putting music papers along the edge as well, but going the other way. You can feel where the edge is. Actually quite like that. There, so it joins up with that music paper. Little bits, just add a bit more glue. See, that's getting there. You will get sometimes some wrinkles if you use PVA. It hasn't got the binder in it that the decoupage glue has to stop it from wrinkling. That looks quite nice there. A bit more interest at the top there. And I think we'll just have a thin strip of that there. That may well do it. Just wandering out a little bit more. Yeah, I think I'll put a little bit more of the, to be careful that it doesn't completely stick to your work surface, and a little bit more of the checked paper on there, on that corner. Making sure it's got glue all the way under. Right. Lift it up. Yep, that's not bad at all. I've got all the edges covered. I'll give it a quick blast. It's more or less dry. Yep. Then we turn it onto the back and you can see where the paper has overlapped. As I say, we're not worried about that because then just put your scissors up to the edge and cut off any spare bits. Now, one of the tips I would say is, if you've got little bits like that, keep them to one side, because if you're doing another bookmark, they're quite nice to add on, because it gives you some layers without having to build layers. I'll show you on one of the bookmarks in a moment what I mean, because one of them was made purely out of these edge strips that I'd kept. That's it. There we are. So that's more or less covered. Well, it is covered everywhere with the different types of paper. I'll show you what I mean by these. These little edgy bits are quite nice and will be quite useful for another bookmark. This one here, you can see a lot of the edge bits were what I'd cut off a larger one and just added in. I'd put a basic layer of book pages and then added these strips that was covered in basic paper on the edges, and it builds your layers without having to actually build layers. That makes sense. So I'll just do one side of this because then you'll get the general idea. Now, when you're inking things, because distress inks are water reactive, I would use something like an archival ink because it is permanent, and it, if anything happens to get spilt on a prized book, you might be able to dry the book out, but if you've got ink on it as well, it'll ruin it. So if you use something like an archival ink, it's permanent and it also won't come off on your hands if you've got damp hands. The alternatives, if you wanted to use distress ink, if you've got distress microglaze, or you've got something like a lip balm, you can use that to seal the surface. You just put a tiny bit on your finger and rub it into the ink, and then it just stops it from moving, basically being reacted again. So you've got your basic bookmark. Imagine that I've done the back as well. And then I've got a selection of stamps here that I use quite a lot. They're all indigo blue, and I use them for what I call freestyle stamping. So I don't put them on the block because I want a random effect. So this is a number 1. Ink it all up again with archival, and I find black the best for this because it's nice strong colour. And what you want to do is put it into areas where you've got a lot of overlapping interest, but nothing looks as if it belongs together, because if you put a stamped image, something like numbers or text or something, onto there, it unifies that section, so it doesn't look as if it's a mishmash anymore. It looks as if it's unified. You can do your stamps on a side like that, partly off. Let's see, we've got a little number one. This is lots and lots of little numbers. I quite like this one. And again, I've got an area here where it's got 3 or 4 different types of paper. They don't look as if they belong together. If I just randomly stamp some numbers there, echo it across the other side, bit at the top there, that looks as if it belongs. I quite like adding lines in as well, which you can do with the edge of your stamp, and lines that way. I discovered this by mistake when I made a mistake on another project, but I actually like the way it looks, because it just gives a bit more detail. So you see, that's all looking as if it belongs together now. Let's see, what else shall we do? We've got some letters here. This is another indigo blue one. Random letters in different sort of directions, and I've got a bit of a blank area at the bottom there, so I'm going to go there. That gives it a bit of interest. Up there, a bit more, and I think just there, and I think that's done. Wank away, stamps away, and we're getting there. They look, it looks as if it belongs together. It looks sort of old, faded, whatever. The gold highlights on the bookmarks, you see here, and the corners, that is actually this stuff, which is foil. You can use craft foil. This actually came from a scrap store, and it's the foil that they use for doing the lines around school photographs. I didn't think they still did school photographs, but obviously they do. So a little bit of PVA. This is extra strong PVA. And dab it where you want it with your fingers. I tend to do opposite corners, and what you want is a random effect. You don't want to be perfect. I do down the edges. Edges always look nice with a bit of gold. You can add a little bit, going a bit further in. It looks strange if you've got bits, just a blob in the middle. It doesn't look very natural. So I'll just wipe that up before I put the foil on, so I'll end up foiling my mat. Wait while it's a little bit tacky, and then place your foil on. Rub along all the edges and wherever you know that you've got glue. You can keep going back if you think it hasn't stuck. You can get special foil glue, but I find PVA works just as well. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, there we are. It has stuck to a few other places where my PVA, where I'd been sticking my papers on, was still a bit wet, but that's quite nice because it's random. I think it needs a little bit of something else. So I'm going to do a little bit more stamping, but this time I've got some sequin waste, or what do they call it? Punchinello, I think they call it quite often. And I'm just going to put it on and then just dab some black ink through with a sponge. Now again, I tend to like things anchored on the sides. I think it's just makes it look better. A little one there, a little bit there. That's it, so that gives it a bit more interest. And that's the bookmark. I'll just turn that over, the black marks. More or less done. If you want to put a few finishing touches on for basically a focal point, you could put something like a stamp. Now I've got these, I've got quite a good selection of used stamps. That one's quite a nice one. It's just Canadian stamp, and I think that would just finish it off because it needs a focal point of some sort. If you wanted to do something else, you could actually sit one of the paper dolls or stand a paper doll on, either instead of or as well as. Paper dolls do tend to get lost a little, but it depends how dark your background is. I think I actually like just the stamp there. I think that's enough. If I did a paler one, I would possibly put a paper doll on. So that I will just stick on with a bit more PVA. And you remember our number that we had. I think coming in at a side would be good. Yeah. So a little bit of glue again. And up there. And again, that just is a bit more interest. And then black the edges again. Make it look as if it belongs. And that's your bookmark. Nice, quick and easy. You can also, I do both sides of mine. I've obviously just done one side, so it's a quick video. But you can do both sides. You can do them different colours, so it's completely different colour on the back. This one, it's yet to have its focal point on. It's possibly going to have a stamp, but that's quite a pale side, and then that's darker because I've got this dark paper on. It's up to you. Whatever you're using up, you can do pink and pretty, you can do vintage grungy, you can do industrial, whatever you want to do. So enjoy yourselves and get going.